Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Double Down, the live news and affairs programme that puts people first. It's Thursday, the 18th of November 2020. We're broadcasting live from Dundalk and Dublin, and I'm your host, Finbar Markey. And what a week it has been, folks, with Leo the Leak surviving a vote of no confidence and judges having a public spat almost in the street. We're going to look at some of those things for a few minutes, but first, tonight's programme is mainly dedicated to looking at the experiences of survivors of the mother and baby homes through the 1940s up until the early 1990s. We're going to talk to and look at and review archive interviews with mothers who've gone through the homes. And we're going to speak to Sheila O'Byrne, a survivor and a campaigner with Irish First Mothers, and Fintan Dunn, an independent journalist and also a facilitator with Irish First Mothers. Before we get into that discussion, I'd like to return to the news of the story that's been dominating headlines for this last 2 weeks, and that's the Leo the Leak scandal, as it's come to be known as. I've been a bit confused and a bit perplexed, both by Leo Varadkar's excuse for leaking documents to Matthew O'Toole, but also I'm perplexed by the opposition's response and their willingness to believe that Leo Varadkar was simply assisting a friend, bad enough as that is in terms of a breach of law and policy. Varadkar has said, and his government colleagues and partners seem to have all accepted, that the leaked documents to the NAGP were to assist and speed up the negotiations with new GP contracts. The opposition appear in the round to be accusing Leo Varadkar of giving documents in a personal capacity as a friendship gesture to Mr. O'Toole. None of the analysis, none of the criticism of what Leo Varadkar has done in leaking these documents have taken into account the history between the IMO, the NAGP and successive Fine Gael governments, central to that being Leo Varadkar and Simon Harris. And I've done some research, and our research team have been looking at this overnight. And from our research, we come up with two unavoidable throbbing questions. And the first question is this: why would Leo Varadkar leak documents to an organisation, the NAGP, the National Association of General Practitioners, that he has consistently refused a place to the negotiating table? So over the years, Leo Varadkar has condemned the NAGP, has refused to allow them to go to the negotiating table, and yet suddenly he's leaking documents to them. So that's a serious question that needs to be asked. Secondly, how could leaking a draft of a GP contract still in negotiation speed up the process of that negotiation when you're leaking it to a group that is well known for throwing spanners in the works of such negotiations? How is that going to speed it up? So let's go and let's look at the first question. And the first question, to remind you, why would he leak documents to an organisation that he has historically denied a place at the table to? Well, over the last few years, Leo Varadkar and Simon Harris have done everything to resist recognising the National Association of General Practitioners. And when you look at their history since their formation in 2013, they have been a pain in the side of the consecutive Fine Gael governments. Every health policy brought out, they criticise it, and quite often the criticisms are reasonable and rational. And so Leo Varadkar over the last few years has been highly critical and have accused the NAGP of being more like a political party. This is a quotation that I got from the Irish Medical Times. It's from 2015, and this is what Leo Varadkar, as health minister, said about the NAGP. And the NAGP, quite frankly, has been willing to flout consumer protection laws and competition laws. And as ministers in the Department of Health, we can't be party to any negotiation with a body that breaks those laws, he claimed. Now, no action has ever been taken against the NAGP by the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. So historically, Leo Varadkar has made very serious accusations against the NAGP. So why would he, a couple of years ago, in the middle of all these negotiations about GP contracts, suddenly start leaking documents to the NAGP if he has seen them as so frictious and so politically motivated in the past? And there's that quotation from Leo Varadkar, making clear that he will not in any way engage with the NAGP, and yet he's now leaking documents to them. The second question: it has been claimed by Leo Varadkar that he leaked the documents to speed up the process of these negotiations between the Irish Medical Organisation and the government. Now, the Irish Medical Organisation is the only organisation representing GPs that is recognised in terms of negotiations. So leaking a document to the NAGP, who are well known for throwing a grenade into these types of negotiations, far from speeding up the process, is guaranteed to at least slow it down and possibly blow the process up where there would be no deal in the end. So the questions remain, why? Cui bono? Who benefits from the leaking of these documents? Well, and it's only a surmisation, but I have a feeling that this is more of a takeover. I have a feeling that the NAGP's leadership, which changed in 2017/18, where Matthew Rose Tuhal took over the leadership, Leo Varadkar's friend, I think something happened in the NAGP because it was a thorn in the side to successive Fine Gael governments, and suddenly it appears it has been neutralised. And it would appear that Leo Varadkar is trying to act like puppet master, what is controlling both the NAGP's reactions and controlling the IMO reactions and controlling the government reaction. There's something not quite right. Maybe I haven't properly put my finger on it. But the questions do need to be asked, but also need to be asked of the opposition. And in particular, I'd like to look just for a minute or two at the 9 independent TDs that voted to support Leo Varadkar in the motion of no confidence that took place the other day. The names of the TDs, I'd just like to read them out for you first of all, so we are making no mistake about what our local TDs are doing in the Dáil. Cathal Berry has confidence in Leo Varadkar. Sean Canny has confidence in Leo Varadkar. Michael Fitzmaurice, that I'm kind of surprised by, but in a way not. Peter Fitzpatrick of Dundalk, and we'll be talking about Peter later on. Marion Harkin, Verona Murphy, Noel Grealish, Michael Lowry, and Michael McNamara. All of those people, all of these TDs, elected TDs, apparently have confidence in Leo Varadkar and have no real issue with him leaking documents near the end of a very long negotiation process. Okay, let's turn to specifically Michael Fitzmaurice. And I'm picking on Michael Fitzmaurice because when he began in politics, he stood on the shoulders of Luke Ming Flanagan to get elected. And I'm sure Luke Ming Flanagan would not have voted confidence in Leo Varadkar the other evening. And I'm really time and again surprised, to the point I suppose where I shouldn't be surprised anymore, at how Fitzmaurice has voted and his voting record in the Dáil. In the Roscommon Herald, Michael Fitzmaurice is reported as giving reasons why he voted in confidence with Leo Varadkar. And he said, yes, the Tainiste didn't go through procedure, but he was trying to get a deal over the line. In the real world, people have to work behind the scenes to get a deal done. His procedure was wrong and he apologised for that. But we have bigger issues to deal with, Brexit and COVID. The debate was basically hurling insults and the general public is sick to the teeth of it. There is many a service in Roscommon and Galway that could have done with that €25,000. He's talking about the cost of the convention centre to have that vote of confidence and no confidence. Is that the politics we want? No wonder there's apathy there. And finally he said, because I don't think it was right. I didn't believe last night that someone else should be sacked. The reason I'm an independent is I vote on what's in front of me. I'm no admirer of Leo and he knows that, but at least I can see the woods for the trees. Well, I'm not sure if you can really see the woods for the trees. Michael, you don't just look at the information that's put in front of you. You go looking for information to make sure there's nothing else out there before you make your judgment. Let's just forensically look at Michael Fitzmaurice's reply again. He was talking about in the real world, people have to do this to get deals over the line. And there he's suggesting that by leaking this document, Leo Varadkar was in some way assisting the process, when we've just outlined that there's no real rationale behind that. Leaking to the NAGP was going to probably throw a grenade into the negotiation process. So there's no logic in that. If you had seen the wood for the trees, Michael Fitzmaurice, you would have noted that yourself. He said the debate was basically hurling insults and the general public is sick to the teeth of it. I saw that debate, Michael Fitzmaurice, and you might have been more nuanced with that comment and highlighted that it was in fact Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil TDs and ministers that were hurling insults and trying to divert the debate. And it seems that they succeeded when it comes to your attention on what was happening in the Dáil during the debate. He said, because I didn't think it was right, I didn't believe last night that someone else should be sacked. The reason I'm an independent is I vote on what's in front of me. Well, just even listening to that, it almost makes me think that there's a culture in Dáil Éireann, even among so-called independents, that nobody wants to get sacked. What if it happens to me someday? Well, I don't think that's the way to make decisions on this. And the reason is this. This is not just about Leo Varadkar giving documents to Matthew O'Toole. This is about integrity. This is about if our government, if our ministers can be trusted in terms of negotiations into the future, internal negotiations within the state, between the agencies of the state and outside agencies, such as everybody from TUSLA to unions, etc. But also, can our international partners trust our negotiations when we are leaking documents left, right and centre and there is no punishment? Leo Varadkar walked away with a vote of confidence the other night. What does that say about Irish democracy, about the integrity of our government, about the trustworthiness of our government? Okay, that's all I'm going to say for now on that subject matter. I want to turn to the topic of mother and baby homes. We did say that we were going to return to have a special on this subject and talk to mothers and listen to archive footage of mothers who have gone through those baby homes. We're joined tonight by Sheila O'Byrne, who herself survived the mother and baby homes and has been campaigning for justice with the survivors group Irish First Mothers. And we're also joined by Fintan Dunn, independent journalist and campaigner with Irish First Mothers. We will also be reviewing archive footage, as I said, and we are going to really try to focus in on the question. So not just looking at the experiences that these women and these survivors had, but focus in on the question, if there's such a thing as closure for these survivors in terms of their campaigning and what they can achieve, what does that closure actually look like? What would be the shape of closure for the survivors of the mother and baby homes? Sheila and Fintan, thanks for joining me this evening. I think you might have to just take your mute off there, guys.
Thanks very much, Finbar. And thanks for taking the time, Finbar, to cover the issue.
No, we did say that we were going to return to it, and I have a feeling that we will be coming back here again.
Great stuff.
Have we got Sheila there? She's still with us as well, is she?
You need to tap the screen, Sheila, and unmute. Maybe I'll just do that.
Yeah, that's okay. So tonight we're going to not just be talking to Sheila and Fintan, but we're going to look at archive interviews that were conducted by Fintan and his partner who passed away a couple of years ago, Cathy McMahon, who herself was a survivor of the home. Hello, Sheila, we have you in, have we?
Yeah, yeah, I'm here.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right.
That's good. Listen, Sheila, thanks for joining us this evening.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here, actually.
That's good to know. And I recognise your face from different functions and that around the place over the last few years. Sheila, can I just ask you, before we start looking into people's experiences, how did you get involved with Irish First Mothers?
Well, how did I get involved? Well, most of them was with me in the home. That's how I got involved.
But in terms of getting involved in campaigning and things like that?
Yeah, it's just I decided I'm going to get outside the Dáil and stand up for justice, you know, and for the mothers, and stand up for prosecutions, for which I'd love to see, you know, for the unmarked graves and for the mothers whose babies, you know, are buried, and so that they can find a marking of their babies for which they truly deserve, not by choice. The babies were put there, and then the mothers then that their babies was forcibly taken from them, which is actually genocide. And then we have the mothers, the little mothers, you know, or I should say, the child becoming the mother, you know. And there was never any justice for that either. And then we had Rose that had the mind of a 7-year-old.
We won't just go into those details yet, Sheila. I was just trying to figure out about your involvement. And so you began the campaign and you decided to stand outside the Dáil and you linked in with other mothers who had gone through the same thing. And we're going to get into the details of your experiences now in a minute or two. Fintan, can I just turn to you for a minute, if you don't mind? And just to give some context to some of the archive interviews that we're about to listen to as well. Yourself and your partner, Kathy, who passed away, Kathy McMahon, a couple of years ago, conducted interviews with the survivors of mother and baby homes, quite a number of interviews. And we're going to be showing some of those clips tonight and listening to them. Can you give me a background to those actual interviews and how you went about collecting them and why and things like that?
Well, it was a situation that we felt we were really being excluded from proper investigation of how serious these crimes against the women really were, that the commission was taking place behind closed doors. And it's ironic, isn't it, that we had a beef tribunal which was held in public. So obviously when things happen to cattle in Ireland, that's very important, deserves a public inquiry. But we never saw where you saw mothers who were willing and able to give testimony. So in order to try and circumvent that and get around that absence of public testimony by mothers, we began to interview the mothers. Kathy McMahon had founded Irish First Mothers and was an outreach program whereby many mothers could discuss in private what had happened to them. And out of that, many of them grew enough in confidence to begin to actually speak and to begin to actually put down their experiences. And it's terrific because some of those who did have passed away since, including the founder of Irish First Mothers, Kathy McMahon. So these are really a treasure. And this is the first, I think, third-party broadcast of these. And I'm very grateful to you for bringing them out.
I'm grateful for you and Kathy for having taken the time to collect such an important archive, especially in the context of the locking away of that specific type of archived experience for at least 30 years into the future. Although we are all generally aware of the things that happened to those survivors in the mother and baby homes, and I always use the word survivors because the more of these women I meet, the strength that's inside them, I think I don't like calling them victims. I think they are very much survivors. But I do think it's important, no matter how much somebody thinks they know about what happened in those homes, that we remind ourselves every so often. And we as a community and as a society should remind ourselves so that we never go back there again. So I'd like to open up with a clip of Claire. Now, Claire is not this woman's real name. And Claire was taken from London, where she worked as a nurse at the age of 18. And she was essentially hoodwinked into coming back to Ireland to give birth to her baby in a mother and baby's home. And we'll take the story from there. Stephen, could you bring in clip number 4 of Claire?
Well, I told them that I didn't want to give them up for adoption.
Yeah.
And I was more or less, I remember she was using the back of her hand and she told me stop talking nonsense. So.
Using the back of her hand, what do you mean?
Yeah, well, she just kind of ushered me away from her. Stop talking nonsense.
Yes, dismissed you. Yes.
And then I was told that I had to bring him to Dublin myself. I had to get the train to Dublin and bring him on the train and go to St. Anne's Adoption Agency. Or the adoption agency in South Anne Street. I don't know if it was St. Anne's or not. And hand him over there.
Right.
And when I was leaving, I was told that if I got off the train, except where I should get off it, that the guards would pick me up and the baby, and I would be brought straight back. So at every station on the way from Cork to Dublin, I was looking out for the guards at every one of them to see where they're waiting for me.
And at this point,
but I didn't see any.
you know, on that journey with your own son, What
with my
level?
own son, and I had to go into this place. I remember when I went up 2 years ago to reunite with my son, I told my daughter before I went in, I said, when we walk in here now, I said there will be stairs going up along the wall on the far side. And at the top of that first flight of stairs, there will be a door going into the left. And inside that door, there's a door to the right and a door to the left again.
Mm-hmm.
And I said I was on the little room in the right, and my son's adoptive parents were in the room on the left, because I could hear the people in the adoption place going in and out, talking to them.
Yeah.
And I sat there for about a half an hour, and then they came in and they took them.
That's terrible.
By myself. I had to go home. Nobody knew anything about it. I had to go home and pretend nothing happened.
So you went from Dublin.
My older sister had a little boy 2 weeks or 1 week before I had my son. And I had to go home and see this child again. A few hours after giving away my own son, and pretend nothing was amiss.
Listen, I was going to ask you about.
Absolutely heartbreaking.
I was going to ask you about that journey up in the train. You did have some time there with your own son. What was the level of connection between the two of you then? What were you feeling then? And how were you?
Heartbroken. Because he was so beautiful. I seriously did think of getting off the train before I reached Dublin, but I was afraid that I would be picked up and brought back.
Just horrible. What so many women went through and nobody ever knew quite often. Sheila.
Yeah.
Do you recognise anything in Claire's story there? You went through an experience in the mother and baby homes as well. Do you recognise any of them feelings or any of those incidents that Claire was describing?
I actually do. South Ann Street. I remember that all right.
You want to tell us about it?
That's where I had to go after my last visit to St. Teresa's Temple Hill. That's where my son ended up, and I had to go and say my goodbyes. And I was only allowed look, not touch. I was actually couldn't believe that they allowed me look, because previously I wasn't allowed look or touch my own flesh and blood when I was in St. Patrick's Mother and Baby Home, Navan Road, Cabra, Dublin, in the maternity wing. And after there, I was made stand on the steps to watch my son Anthony go for punishment. And then I got a letter when he was 3 months to go to St. Teresa's Temple Hill. And I told him I have no choice. I have to put you before me. I can't bring you home. I have to go home empty-handed, because we broke the original sin and we wouldn't be accepted in society at all by anyone, because we broke this terrible, terrible sin, which was a terrible stigma onto the mothers, that weren't married. And then I got the 45 bus, couldn't speak to anyone, knowing of the hurt and how broken-hearted I actually was. And straight into South Ann Street, up the stairs, the wooden stairs. And I just went into a room, the left-hand side actually. And the girl just said at the desk, sign here, sign there. And there was no solicitor present. There was nobody there to say, we can help you and we can give you advice and we can do this. There was none of that at all. And my son was mixed race, so it was a different story again. You just wouldn't be accepted in society at all. I mean, mixed race child back then was not the done thing, you know. The only baby that was accepted back then was the white baby, but not the mixed race one. In society, you know, if I had have went out into the world, if I had have been allowed, but unfortunately, I wouldn't have survived.
And can I ask you, Mila,
Yeah.
Claire in her interview had said that at the beginning, the nuns had told, or she was of the opinion or the belief that in some way she was going to be assisted, that there was some plan going to be made by the services, whatever you want to call them, the priests and the nuns, for her to be able to keep her baby in some way. And it was only when she gave birth, really, that she really realised that actually they're not going to let her keep her baby. Did you at any point think that there was hope that you'd be able to keep your wee baby?
No, no, there was no hope, and you were told, you know, this is the only way that your baby would be given to, you know, a very respectful couple, you know, a married couple, and it's not the done thing for you to keep your baby at all.
Okay.
That they just wouldn't let you.
Yeah.
Everything was planned. They had it all planned from St. Patrick's Guild, 82 Haddington Road. That's where it was. And then it was the Monsignor in Sandymount that did a lot of planning too. And I went to a family first, but I didn't stay too long because, you know, I was taking I went through an awful trial there. And I got out of there and I made my way down to St. Patrick's in Avon Road because there was no way I could go home because you shamed the family, you shamed the parish, you shamed the people, you know, in you know, in the community.
Yeah.
And you just wouldn't be accepted in society. And when I was in St. Patrick's, you had the Bon Secure nuns who collaborated with the Daughters of Charity. And it was actually a Bon Secure nun that said to me, don't ever tell anyone that you were here because you'll never be accepted into society. Never. You're damaged goods.
Okay.
And remember what I'm saying, she says. You will never be accepted. So if I was you, I wouldn't tell anyone.
Okay.
And that's my advice to you, she said to me.
Okay. I'm going to just turn to Fintan for a little second there, Sheila, if you don't mind. Fintan, you've interviewed so many mothers and archived their interviews. Has this been the general experience of them all?
Well, you notice that the focus in that story there of Claire's is on the loss of the child, that separation from the child. And while, of course, there was, especially in the early years, mistreatment of mothers in mother and baby homes, especially in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. But by the time we came into late 70s, 80s, there wasn't that level of mistreatment, physical mistreatment. But you know, the wounds of physical mistreatment can heal, but the grief from the loss of a child in that way is something that can't heal and that can never heal. Even in the case of reunions, that loss can never be healed. And that is really what comes across in these personal testimonies, is that grief that cannot be closed.
Yeah, and we're going to look at the long-term effects.
It's so difficult for it to try.
In a few minutes. But isn't there something, when you read and you listen to the detail of the extent of powers that the nuns in the church and the state had at the time, that we went beyond the borders of Ireland and outside of the island itself. So in Claire's testimony, as an example, they had the powers to be able to have her taken from England and taken home to Ireland by priests and all this cloak and dagger kind of business, which was equivalent to the KGB or something. When you actually read these people's stories, it was what the Stasi and the KGB were doing, except it was people dressed in black, or nurses with habits on and things like this. It was the church that was doing it. But there seems at times to have been more than just a hiding of pregnancies out of marriage. There seemed to be at times that there was a hiding of systematic child and vulnerable persons' sexual abuse that was happening in the state, and that these institutions and these practices were actually a cover-up quite often for systematic sexual abuse. I'm going to introduce the voice of Kathy McMahon, Fintan's partner that passed away a couple of years ago. And this is Kathy, who was giving her own testimony, talking about an experience that she had in the mother and baby home where she was, and some of the people that she met in the home. Have you got that clip of Kathy there for me, please, Stephen?
I went on to have a second daughter 18 months later in St. Patrick's on the Navan Road. I encountered a woman who was 37. Her name was Angela. And she was 37, but she had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. She was on her 4th pregnancy. Nobody asked in the convent, how did this happen? And word came back that Angela had had a visit from her elderly mother on a Sunday, and Angela went to go to the bathroom, and she gave birth to her baby on the toilet. She wouldn't know what labour was. Angela was returned to St. Pat's without an infant. We don't know whether that infant survived. And I'll tell you a little bit about Angela. She used to stand with us in the night time after the nuns were gone to bed, and we'd go out to the toilet to have a cigarette. We weren't supposed to do it, but at least we were breaking the rules somewhere. Angela would come out and join us some of those nights, and she would tell us about the prizes that she won for acting as the Plum Fairy in school plays. And she would perform the Plum Fairy ballet dancing for us. This is a 37-year-old woman with the mental capacity of a 7-year-old, pregnant on her 4th pregnancy. Now, I met Minister Flanagan in 2014, before the terms of reference of the Commission of Inquiry were established. This was an issue I raised with him. And I'm not the only one that witnessed this. There are 65 mothers in the group, in Irish First Mothers. And almost every one of us have stories to tell that are similar to that and similar to poor Grace's story. That's why I cry. Because of those women, because of the mothers that came back to Dunboyne after their babies been taken from them in Hollis Street Hospital. And the tears and the sadness and the numbness because we were put into shock. I think of the women in St. Patrick's who were on the, when they were delivered to St. Patrick's, and you'd hear the sobbing late at night of those women and those young girls, and we'd go around to see if we could find who was crying so we could comfort them.
Fintan, that was the voice of your partner, Kathy. That was clearly that particular experience of meeting that girl with an intellectual different ability. That was particularly cutting, and Kathy seems to have carried that along with her through her life as much as her own pain, the pain of that girl. I just introduced that by saying that there was a cover for systematic sexual abuse. Can you elaborate on that for me?
Well, I think we have to face the reality that Kathy outlined there, that all of the mothers can recount similar tales, so more than one individual, and underage individuals indeed, let alone those who were with that kind of an innocence. And you couldn't but be haunted by that image of that innocent young woman of that age dancing innocently for them and not even knowing what was being done to her. And four times she had become pregnant. And the commission, of course, invited people affected by this to come in and testify. So this was never an investigation, the Commission of Investigation that's about to report, because it never sought out such women. It just waited to see who came in through the door. It had no investigatory arm. And so this is the untold story. And I'm glad that you're covering it, because it needs to be told. Where is their justice, as Sheila says? Where's their justice?
Isn't there a danger that the women of full mental capacity, the survivors who went through those homes, there is a danger that those secondary stories that they tell the inquiry, those secondary stories may be viewed as hearsay and not focused on, and they'll be asked just to give evidence of their own cases and their own. There is the potential for, we don't know how exactly this inquiry was carried out in terms of the depth of the questioning, and we probably never will.
Yeah, I can absolutely address that, because I was in the room when Cathy McMahon raised this specific issue with Minister Flanagan at the time, who had ministerial responsibility, and asked for a Garda liaison to be established in connection with this Commission of Investigation in order to maximize the potential for consequential evidence, not directly out of the testimony, but as a prudent measure. And his response was that there are Garda stations open in towns all across the country. Some of them are open even 24 hours a day, trying to make crimes were committed. Simply report them there.
Yeah, so it would appear that Charlie Flanagan likes to differentiate significantly between crimes. On the one hand, we have an inquiry, it's not criminal, but on the other hand, in the dark and smoky rooms, he'll tell you to go off to the guards, knowing that you on your own going to the guards probably won't have much of an impact in itself, and the guards will try to fob you off at the desk, which I think was a common experience of a lot of people, even up until recently. Let's move on, and Sheila did touch upon, and I want to bring Sheila back in a minute, but Sheila did touch upon the lifetime impact and effects that the stay and the experiences and the losing of the child have had on them. I'd just like to pull in an audio clip of Mary, who is talking about how losing her baby in the nursing homes affected her through life, to the extent of even affecting her ability to have a family. Do we have that clip there, please, Stephen?
It was the nuns that arranged it with the town clerk, would it be?
Mm-hmm.
I think the question was asked, are you doing this of your own free will? But I mean, you had a gun to your back at that stage. No, you said yes, you were.
Yeah.
But you weren't, like.
And did you pay for that solicitor? Who paid for the solicitor? Was that ever brought up in terms of who brought you there?
I think it was the nuns who paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
It was the nuns from St. Attractus Adoption Agency.
Right, well, they had you broken at that point, I suppose.
Ah, yeah, big time.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, yeah. I was well broke.
If it was still having that much of an emotional impact on you 5 years afterwards, then maybe that was the same 10 and 15 and 20. Like, what do you think were the ongoing emotional consequences of the entire thing?
All my life, all her life. Simple wee things like, do you have kids? Well, what do you say? Yes, I do. No, I don't. And it's, every time anything like that come up, my whole life was affected by it. If I met someone new, you had to tell the story, and it just affected my whole life.
And you didn't have children subsequently, you're saying, then?
No, I didn't, no. And I felt like I was being disloyal to her by going, that I needed her to know how much I cared about her. So it was this decision that I had made that I wouldn't go ahead and have more family. Because I just felt that she would feel that I was being disloyal to her.
I normally don't get personal with these things in this show, but just to say to Mary, if she's listening, that I am one of them children from the mother and baby homes. I was in St. Clair's orphanage in Stamullen, and I have no qualms about saying that I hold nothing against my natural mother, and I don't feel let down in any way. I don't know her. I don't know if I'll ever meet her, but I certainly don't feel let down, and I understand the circumstances that so many people were put in back then and right up until the early 90s. So for any mothers that are out there who think their children that they've never seen are out there and condemning them or feeling bad about them, don't think it for a minute. Put that out of your mind. Sheila, how has this affected you over the years of your life since it happened all that time ago? What impact has this had on you?
Well, as I said, I have a collective memory, from the very time I went in there into St. Patrick's, and then, all the happenings that happened in there, all the experiences that I witnessed, of saying no birthdays, no Christmas, no communion, no confirmation. You're missing out on all those years in your life of which are of your flesh and blood, your baby that was taken from you, which is actually genocide. And I mean, this law is actually an Irish law.
Yeah, we're going to move on to that now in a wee second, Sheila.
Yeah.
You're reminding me. My mother used to always say to me on my birthday, me adoptive mother, there's somebody thinking about you today, and that's kind of touched the vein with regards to what you said. Was this something that crosses your mind every day? Do you suffer bouts of being down and depressed about it, or how are you even today coping with this?
Well, I had to be strong, and as I said, you couldn't speak to people about it at all because of the shame, the terrible shame that you brought on your family. Now, my family are a good family, so I will not wrong them at all. Like, I mean, it was the church and the state that drummed it into their heads that this was a terrible thing, for me to break the original sin. And, it's not right for the likes of me to be, uh, to come away, to have to, I had to come away from my family. And God loved them. They were, they were dwarfed and made out that I was, trash. And no one will ever accept me, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. And that's how my family were made feel. I mean, they were begrudged of their flesh and blood.
Sure.
My parents are gone now. They're gone to their God. They're gone to God, and they have never met their grandchild. Now I found my grandchild, or my son. Sorry, my son.
Yeah.
After 42 years, took a hard battle through red tape and trying to find here and get in through that door, and nobody's talking and nobody will tell you anything. But eventually, I got the door open through a lot of
A
red tape.
lifetime's effort, a lifetime's work to get that done on your part.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, it really, really is. But
Can we
I
actually ask,
found them.
and I know you're chomping at the bit in terms of the campaign with the Irish First Mothers.
Yeah.
What is it? And first of all, is there anything that could bring closure for you with regards to this in terms of at least campaign? You'll never probably ease the questions and the emotions and things like that, but in terms of campaigning, what
Well,
is it that the government?
I'd like to see, well-being for the uh, the mothers, because there's a lot of mothers there and they're living in squalor, and there's Rose McKinney, the mother of Tuam, and that woman hasn't even got central heating in her house. She's 81, and Rose was in Tuam twice, and she for punishment after being in twice. Then she was in the laundries, the Magdalene laundries in Galway. And yes, the what you call them, I forget the name of them now, but they had her data and anyway, and they never got a hold of just for Magdalene's knew her data where to find her, and they never got that woman, never got contact with Rose or the Christine Buckley Centre, which the Mother and Baby Home Group is there, and they had our data and didn't get in touch with Rose about giving her testimony to Judge Yvonne Murphy for the Commission of Mother and Baby Home Inquiry. And yes, Minister Catherine Sapone knew as well. And they didn't go to Rose, which Rose lives in Cabra in Dublin, which is very near where the Commission of Inquiry took place in Leeson Street, 73 Leeson Street. And Minister Sapone went over to Boston and had all these academics up on the table, and they're doing an investigation. And these people, the academics, it's impossible for them to give an insight and know the fact and the truth. It's just impossible.
Okay, so there's two things I heard there.
The actual person that can give the insight and the truth and the facts are the mothers
themselves.
The mothers, they're the ones that knows the facts and the truth and can speak about the babies in the home and about the children that were left there too. Not anyone else,
Okay,
and
so there's two things
to say that woman deserves her testimony, and I mean the mothers actually deserve well-being. They need to be facilitated for the wrongs that was done onto them, including the wrongs that was done onto me.
Sheila, just for a wee minute there, because we are getting close to time and there's a lot to talk about yet. So on the one hand, and I've never heard anybody say this before, and I'm glad to hear you saying this, it's, the government's main fear, allegedly, is that people will be wanting compensation. And it may be more than that. Maybe the government want to have a nice, clean-looking history. But I've never heard anybody before say, what we want is basic good conditions, living conditions for mothers who are out there who are still, as you used the word, I think, living in squalor in some circumstances, and that they're still suffering after all these years. But you also, I think, are saying, from what you've just said, that a lot of the mothers have still, and survivors have still not been included in this inquiry, have not had an opportunity to have their story put on the record. Fintan, can I just pull you in for a wee minute? Is there anything else from the Irish First Mothers perspective that would move the nation closer, the nation and the survivors closer to closure on these matters?
Well, it's really to pick up the agenda, which has been left unfinished by particularly Minister Sapone's period in the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, where she had oversight over all of this commission of investigation. And during that time, not even the adoption tracing legislation has been progressed through. Neither has the necessary legislation so that exhumations could proceed at Tuam and other sites. And neither has any health and well-being supports for survivors been put in place in all that period. So 5 years now, and we have spent, I'm glad to celebrate the amount of money we've spent on a lot of legal fees associated with the Commission of Investigation. It runs to tens of millions, but yet we haven't a single penny yet in the way of supports for the most seriously affected mothers. And they are out there, and they don't need just central heating and proper supports to help them overcome what they went through, but they also need very targeted counselling, and that's not on offer either. Generalized counselling is available. Really, mothers need to be empowered to share with each other the experiences that they went through in groups. And it's in that group sharing where it's different than speaking to a clinical therapist who was never in the situation. When you're speaking with fellow mothers who were through it, and this is what Kathy McMahon established with Irish First Mothers. And I'd like to invite mothers out there who haven't yet met with others to look for Irish First Mothers on Facebook and use Facebook as a way of outreaching and start to share your experiences with other mothers. It's so healing to do so. And there's a commonality and a sharing of collective experience that helps to heal the past and also acts as a guideline for people who are only now coming to terms with these issues.
Yeah.
So,
and that's something that you guys are facilitating beyond the state, because as you say, the state is not particularly facilitating that at the moment, but Irish First Mothers are. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's something that really needs to see the state follow that peer-led therapeutic and healing model rather than a top-down isolated individual therapy for individual victims of this genocide, as Sheila correctly described it as.
And that's what I want to come on to right now, actually, Fintan. Sheila has spoken about the criminality of what happened to herself and so many other women. Sheila also mentioned the word genocide, and a few weeks ago on the program when we were speaking about this, you mentioned genocide. We didn't have time to focus in on it, and we said we would come back to it. Fintan, I will bring Sheila on this in a second. What do you mean by genocide, and why do you think that that particular criminal accusation is applicable to what happened in mother and baby homes?
Well, my use of the word comes from Kathy McMahon herself, who in 2017 asked me, was it genocide what they did to us? Because she had been researching and she'd found the International Criminal Court Act 2006, which is in Irish law, and it described how the act of genocide can be shown to have taken place if there is forced transfer of children from one group who are religiously selected to another group. That is a signature of genocide. And I had to admit, having seen it in black and white in Irish law, that she was correct. And so as a result of that, Irish Mothers on the 4th of April 2017 charged the Irish Attorney General to look at this issue and have since repeated that call to the Attorney General currently to give leave and permission to the Director of Public Prosecutions to just consider that matter. Was this genocide? And do certain institutions and or individuals need to face prosecutions over what happened?
And could that be done posthumously?
Sorry?
Could that be done posthumously if some of the perpetrators were no longer living? Would it be possible to look into genocide in those circumstances?
Absolutely.
Because on the one hand, we look at the locking away for 30 years of documents, which may be employed to ensure that most of the people involved in this won't be around anymore. Can you look at this in a posthumous way?
Well, yes, because you'd be looking at institutional genocide. So you'd be looking at, for example, the statement by Paddy Cooney, a Justice Minister of Fine Gael in 1974, when he addressed the first ever meeting of adoption workers. Ireland was now training up a cadre of adoption workers it would send out into the provinces and counties and towns of Ireland. And he said to them in 1974, I think we're all agreed that it is in the best interests of all that these illegitimate babies be essentially taken from their mothers and raised by others. I think we're all agreed, he said. That was, we say, an exhortation to genocide. He was sending people out to, on a mass scale, do exactly what it says in the Genocide Act, forcibly take the children from them and transfer them to what it thought were more worthy and deserving people.
And there was as much state actors as it was the church with regards to this as well. It's becoming clearer and clearer as well. We're getting tight for time. Sheila, in terms of criminal charges, you said that you would love to see people charged over this. Could you elaborate on that a bit for me? How
Well,
important is criminal charges to you?
yeah, how important it is to me is because I've witnessed so many different kinds of mothers, in the home. I witnessed a little child, that was expecting twins, and that little one died, and there was no justice, and nobody was brought to justice for that little one. She was only a baby and becoming a mother, and nobody cared. And nobody cared about Rose either, that had the mind of a 7-year-old who used to come and sit at the end of my bed in the dormitory. And that's Angela. That's who Kathy mentioned.
Yeah.
I knew that girl as well, and I used to have to bring her back to her bed. And there was no justice for that girl, and there was no justice for the mothers that were taken out and brought to the asylums, for which I witnessed and saw. And I also witnessed had to go with a little girl who was 15 months old, and go down and watch her be taken, accompanying her with the nurse, and watch her being taken out into the grounds in St. Patrick's and handed over to a couple. I always remember it was an Austin Green Cambridge car. And I knew there was something not right about that. I said, "There's something, why isn't that in the office, with the Reverend Mother?" And then there was one of the daughters of charity said to me, "Well, now," she said, "isn't it great to see the little one get adopted?" And I said, "Yes, sister." And I wouldn't let her see it was killing me. It was killing me watching the little one, because that little one got attached to me, in the nursery where I worked
Do you
in the
think,
home.
Tina, that there's anybody still alive today that would be high enough up making decisions like that at the time, that would still be alive, that could face criminal charges, do you think?
Oh, the Reverend Mother's still alive.
Okay.
Oh, she's still alive. Oh, there's a few of them alive. I mean, when I think about that little one, and I watching her screaming, being handed over, and then she says to me, "Well, now, isn't it great to see the little one getting adopted? There's joy on one side of the door and sadness on the other." She said, "Now, this will get you ready for when it's your turn. Off you pop now, back to your work."
Yeah.
And I looked after the sick and the dying babies, and a lot had deformities, and I loved every one of those babies. But, to think that they actually, they weren't those that died, that they didn't give them decent burials,
Yeah.
because it was out of marriage, because of the original sin, that poor baby suffered and was buried in an unmarked grave, and the mother was never, ever, ever given the human right, to be present at the burial of their flesh and blood.
Yeah.
And to this day now, as I'm going to speak about Anne O'Gorman, Anne was in St. Patrick's
If
as
you
well.
just
She
pull
was
the
in,
camera a little bit away
yeah,
so that we can see
okay.
your face there. Thanks a million.
I'm going to speak about Anne,
Yeah,
who
yeah.
we stood outside the dial with Anne, to try and get someone's attention, and nobody cared. Nobody. That broken-hearted woman, our little one is 48. Uh, her name is Evelyn, and she's buried in the grounds of Bessborough Mother and Baby Home, Blackrock, Cork. And that all Anne wants is to find the marking of where her baby is. Now Anne she is in ill health, and that's all we want, is for one of the nuns, the Sisters of the Sacred Heart, just to come forth and show Anne where where the little one is,
Yeah.
before Anne leaves this earth.
Yeah.
And as I say, they have these groups, mother and baby home groups. We don't recognise the groups, First Mothers, and I'm also speaking about Survivors United at last, which we are collaborated with too. That's Morris Patton O'Connell and Catherine Coffey O'Brien. Catherine is a mother too, and she went through the industrial schools, and um, and Anne was in the industrial schools and the Magdalen laundries as well. God love her. But I mean, that's all she wants for someone. But these groups that are funded, these mother and baby home groups that are funded, they did not assist us in any way or form. They didn't care. You had a collaborative form that was organised by Jim Halley and Minister Catherine Sapone, and the minority of them, well, it was a hand-picked forum by two adoptees. Now, these two adoptees are, they did good in life, very comfortable, well-to-do.
Sheila,
So
I'm going to have to cut you off soon because we're over our time.
Okay, but just to say, the ones that were on it, there was 3 people that was actually in the home. The rest were all academics, and the rest were never there. But these were well-to-do, and these did not make recommendations for the survivors. They just went ahead and made their own. And the recommendations that was made was, we look for a medical card. But they didn't think that that some of the mothers are actually living in squalor, and they're in dire straits. They didn't think of that. They didn't
Sheila,
even ask.
I'm going to have to cut you off. We're so
Okay,
over
I'm
time.
sorry about that.
Don't be
but
silly. I want
yeah.
to have you back to talk about more detail about your experience of campaigning in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to end up just this section before we finish off with a little comedy monologue. I just want to finish off this section with Cathy McMahon from the other side of the grave, as it were. Her voice is still here. Her campaigning is still happening with her voice. I just want to finish off with a clip from Cathy about what she wants to see from the Irish First Mothers campaign. Stephen, do you have that clip?
We're not talking about ancient history here. We're talking about young women today, still walking around in their 40s, who are suffering the same trauma, the same shame. For far too long, we've been kept silent. We're not behind the convent doors anymore, but my personal experience of trying to engage with the Commission is that it's all the same secrecy. It's the hushed voices. It's the why do you want to give that evidence in public because, what about other people? It's our story. We are the ones who lived the experience, who were incarcerated in the convents. I'm so bold as to call them concentration camps. And Irish First Mothers have made a request to the Attorney General in relation to looking at all of this issue on the basis of genocide. And I've told my story today. It's what I went through, but it's what thousands of other women went through. It's not about me. It's about all of us. But I'm calling on transparency, openness, and away with the secretiveness. We're not gagged anymore. We did nothing wrong. We were not sinners or fallen women. We're human, and we deserve our voices to be heard.
That was the voice of Cathy McMahon. Wherever she is, she's still doing her work and doing it well. I'd like to thank Sheila O'Byrne and Fintan Dunn for joining us today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Finbar.
Okay, we're going to have to finish up, folks. As I say, I'm thanking my guests, Fintan Dunn and Sheila O'Byrne. I'd like to thank our Dublin producers, Stephen Kerr and Danny Peragier. And here in Dundalk, Stephen McDowell and Michelle McDowell in our Dundalk studio. Just a little bit of humour or comedy before we end. Dundalk and the border counties are in the news this week. Big news for the border counties, as it would appear the giant wall to keep out the northerners is well on the way to being built. Peter Fitzpatrick, TD, has called for the army to be posted along the border to keep them darn northerners out. Something to do with COVID, I believe. And it's being reported now that he has upgraded his demands to building a wall. And we have images just coming in of the wall. Apparently, Peter Fitzpatrick wanted it to be designed, we're told, on the Great Wall of the North from Game of Thrones. Do we have an image of that wall there, Stephen? And I must say, that is an impressive wall that Peter Fitzpatrick, ex-Fine Gael, now independent TD, is building north of Dundalk. But Fitzpatrick himself took time out for a photo opportunity outside Dáil Éireann yesterday, where he warned gravely that winter is coming and that the night workers from the north are coming. Do you have an image of him talking outside the Dáil there? There he is, Peter Fitzpatrick. He's getting really into the role of Jon Snow. When he said that the Northerners were coming and the night workers were coming, this led to a lot of confusion in Dáil Éireann, where ministers and TDs thought that Arlene Foster was coming down from the north for secret negotiations to try to capture our Irish dragons. We're not going to let that happen. Thanks for joining us tonight, folks. See you next week at 10 o'clock Thursday night. EOI.